the speaker is Sir Ghillean Prance, who's sitting just here, who has flown here from Brazil. He tells me he was sitting there the night, last night or the night before last, and it was actually cooler there than it is here. So he's flown in and he's flying back on Tuesday, so we're really grateful for him coming here to speak to us tonight. Now, many of you will have seen the fruits of Ghillean's work because he was director of Kew Gardens for many years, but when he retired, he managed to get himself a job in Hawaii, and he's also scientific director of the Eden Project. I'm sure many of you have seen that down in Cornwall if you live in England. And he's worked a lot of his life in Brazil. He tells me he's lived with 16 different Indian tribes in South America. So if he lapses accidentally into speaking the local lingo, you must prod him to stop him. Because he's, as I say, just been in Brazil looking at environmental issues there. So I'm not going to tell you all of his degrees. He's got 11 degrees, he's written 13 books, and he's given all sorts of awards. The biggest of which I'm sure was his knighthood in '95. So we're really grateful to you, and without further ado, I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Well, I will just tell you a little bit before I show the thing I prepared about what I was doing in Brazil. I was planning to be with you this afternoon, and so I rather alarmed Dennis and Rodney when I sent an email to say 6 weeks ago that I'd been invited to a floating symposium in the Amazon by His All Holiness, the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. Now I know that's Istanbul today, but he calls himself Constantinople. He's the head of the Orthodox churches, and he's known as the Greek Patriarch because he has organized, this is his 6th symposium. The first one was in the Black Sea, he's had one in the Adriatic, the Aegean, the Danube, etc. But the 6th one was the Amazon, and so as an Amazon expert, I was invited to come along on this symposium. 200 people on a floating hotel in the Amazon. It had about a third of them were from different religions, a third were scientists, and a third were environmentalists. So it varied from the Metropolitan John of Pergamon, who is a wonderful Orthodox theologian, to an environmental activist like Vandana Shiva from India, one of the wonderful environmental activists who I've known for many years. So it was wonderful. The theme of the symposium was religion, science, and the environment. So it was exactly on the theme of what you are doing here at the Faraday Institute. So I've had my batteries really charged in the last week doing that, and my task at the symposium was to give the final summing up. So the disadvantage of that is you have to attend every lecture, and so that's what I did. And so at 4 o'clock last night, I was giving the final lecture, and then I rushed to the airport in Manaus, flew to Lisbon, and then got from Lisbon to London. I got here all right, I'm glad to say, but my baggage didn't. It got lost somewhere between Lisbon and London, so I'm hoping that it'll catch up with me at home tomorrow. But anyway, the symposium was extremely interesting because there were a lot of good scientists, a lot of Brazilian scientists there, particularly a very well-known Brazilian climatologist. And there were representatives of several other religions. There was someone who has translated the Quran into Azerbaijani, a very interesting man who brought us what the Quran has to say about the environment. There were 6 Indian shaman, the leaders of the various indigenous tribes of the Amazon. And so it was very interesting interacting with them. And the discussion between them and the Christians, the Muslims, the Hindus that were there was extremely interesting. And of course, a great deal of it was about science and what we can do for the environment. I suppose the thing that shocked me the most on this trip, we made a field trip to a soy area where they're growing soybean. Now, Brazil has been growing soy for a long time in the central part of Brazil, which is savanna. But over the last 10 years, it has spread into the Amazon region. And I didn't know it had gone so up right near to the Amazon River now, and that really alarmed me. And most of it is for export to feed cattle, pigs and chicken around the world, particularly Europe and China are the main importers. 10% of the soya produced in Brazil comes to the UK. So I have come back determined to lobby against the feeding soya from the rainforest to chickens and cattle in the UK. And the Bishop of Liverpool, who was with me, is someone else who was really moved by this, and he appeared on BBC News against soybeans, and his secretary sent an email to us on the ship there saying, I was just inundated with phone calls and emails from chicken farmers in the UK saying they weren't aware that they were using soy. Anyway, that's a little bit about what I have been doing and why I couldn't be with you this afternoon, and so they put this as an after-dinner speech. So I don't know who's more tired, you after a hard week of work, or me after flying over last night. I'll try not to go to sleep in my own talk. Well, I am going to really talk about the environment. And in this, I think that it's very important that religion has something to say about it. Because if we really want to take the environmental crisis seriously, it is a moral and ethical crisis. And so, whatever religion you are, I think it's important. The Jewish and Christian scriptures begin with this verse. In the beginning, God has created the heavens and earth. A statement that most religions can make. And certainly I believe that as a Christian, and is one of the reasons why I feel that I should be very deeply involved in environmental work. And the Bible also says that the earth belongs to God. It is the Lord's and all that's in it, in one of the Psalms. But this slide shows what we're doing to this earth, or creation. And all around the world as I travel, I'm seeing environmental problems at the moment. This is the beautiful, undisturbed Amazon rainforest here, and it is so important for the world, because a lot of the world climate, not just the climate in the Amazon, depends on this, the world's largest mass of rainforest. And one of the things that I saw in this symposium I've just been in from Brazilian climatologists is that almost the whole of South America, not just the Amazon, receives its rain from the Amazon rainforest. It is spread in the air currents. Well, this is a small patch of rainforest in Brazil, in the rainforest that is down the Atlantic coast in the state of Bahia. And you can see there it says 1945, but this is 1990. This is an area where it's been well documented. You see all these small patches, and this is an area where the rainforest has been isolated from the Amazon for a long time. And when I did a study of 1,000 species of trees in it, we found that 530 of them were endemic to that forest, occur nowhere else. Now if it's been reduced like this, then species are going extinct. So that is, as a biologist, something that concerns me. Yet botanists from Kew go out plants that haven't been catalogued or named. This one, for example, is called Harleodendron, because it was discovered by one of my colleagues from Kew Botanic Gardens, called Ray Harley. But because it's got the name Harleodendron, that means it was not only a new species of plant, but a new genus. We're destroying and losing those sort of things before we even know what is there. This is what's called cloud forest. As you go up into the mountains in the tropics, you usually get a much wetter forest, and it has all these Spanish mosses, which are not really a moss, and other things that are characteristic of very wet and humid forest. This photo is taken in Costa Rica, in a forest called Monteverde, where one of my students did her PhD thesis. And she discovered for the first time the pollination of the plant she was working on by mice. So she phoned me in New York and said, it's mice. I knew what she meant because we'd been looking at this. Well, I came down immediately and went out at night with her and looked at her plants. But at the same time, these toads were out in the forest. They only come out from under the roots of the trees once a year at mating time. And they were beautiful. They're tiny, about 4 centimeters long, but they're so beautiful. I went back to Costa Rica 3 years ago on holiday with my wife, and I asked about the golden toads, and they said they're extinct. The climate has changed. I think you can probably see in the front at least what it says here, a dry climate cured the golden toad of Costa Rica. And that is because cutting the forests in the lowlands, although this is a reserve, meant that the clouds weren't there for about 3 months a year, for 3 years in a row. And it coincided with the breeding time of this and various other frogs and amphibia. And 4 species have gone extinct on this one reserve. This one only occurs there, so it's extinct in the world. The others on other mountains in Costa Rica, but threatened by that. And you can see this is the sort of thing that's happening, that cutting down the forest in the lowlands is impacting the nearby montane cloud forests. That's why this and quite a lot of other amphibia are going extinct. And here are the statistics of deforestation in the Amazon. You can see that the record year was 1995, where we were very worried when it went up to 2.7 million hectares. And as you see, it went down a bit because of the shock of this, and it's gradually going up again. And if we go on to 2004, 2.6 million, so up here on the graph. I just got on this trip the statistics for 2005, and I'm glad it's gone down again to 18.5, so to about here, because again, we're getting worried about this. It's an awful lot of rainforest that's being lost. Now, there are 2 reasons why this is serious. The first is the effect it's having on climate, and the second is the loss of biological species. And we can go almost anywhere in the world and see this deforestation. This is a photo I took in Borneo. Same thing, but it's mainly for extracting the timber, and then people colonize the areas where the timber has been logged. You heard from the introduction to me that after I left Kew, I had a 2-year chair in Hawaii. That was a real hardship posting. And there I was dealing with the saving of some of the rare species of plants. And if we look at this, you can see that in the plants, 83 species have gone extinct. In the birds, also 18 of the native species of birds have gone extinct. If you like, Hawaii is extinction capital USA. And the more we lose species, the the more we are losing our options for the future. Who knows which of those plants will be useful for something in the future? Who knows which of those birds disperses the seeds of the plants or pollinates the flowers? And so their extinction probably affects many other things. Well, 1,400 scientists got together and did what is called the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. And I was one of the many authors of this. To sum up, it is 5 big volumes actually, but I'm going to show you the four main findings of it that you can read on the screen. And it is saying how our demands for food and for fresh water, timber, fiber and fuel is what is really causing the environmental destruction. This has resulted in a largely irreversible loss of biodiversity. And the second main finding says that while gains have been made in the wealth and the standards of living for some people in the world, it's been done at the expense of ecosystem services, and it has also exacerbated poverty in certain places and among some groups of people. It says that unless this is addressed urgently, that we will lose the options for future generations. The third main finding is that this could get worse in the first half of this century and is a barrier to achieving the goals of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which is to preserve the biodiversity of the world. And this document is not all a negative one. It is a document that's trying to say what we should do and be positive, what sort of action is needed. And its fourth conclusion says that many options do exist, but that it is going to be very hard to make these changes. It will involve significant change in policies, institutions, and practices that are not currently underway. So this is what biodiversity scientists are saying. Climate scientists are saying the same sort of thing. As a biologist, I see changes in climate wherever I go. Last year was the biggest drought ever in the Amazon. Whole rivers, tributaries of the Amazon, dried up. This is the cherries in flower at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. One of our botanists studied when things flower in Kew, 300 different species, for the last 35 years. And his conclusions are that things like these cherries are flowering on average 8 days earlier than they did when he started the study. And there are quite a lot of scientific papers saying that the rapid change is occurring in the flowering time because the climate is milder, and so things come into flower earlier. And interestingly enough, scientists at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. did a study of 100 species of plants in the area of Washington, including the famous cherries from there. And conclusion, over the last 20 years, things are flowering 7 to 8 days earlier than they used to. Now this, just when things flower, might not seem important to you, but birds are migrating earlier and at different times. And what is happening, they're beginning to make their nests earlier, before there's enough insects to feed their chicks. So this wonderful relationship between plants and animals is getting out of sync. And so that is causing extinction. And this one just says that there are papers about the arrival of birds being different. So this is telling us something about changing climate. And climate modelers like this one done at the Hadley Centre of our meteorological office sort of predicts a little bit about what the climate might be. And it's a good time to show this one when it is so exceptionally hot in the UK at present. This is a photo I took, I think, when I was about 15 or 16 years old, and it is of a mountain called Ben Lawers in Scotland. I used to spend a lot of time walking in the Scottish mountains and studying the plants. We have a group of plants that are called alpine and grow on the mountains of Scotland and Wales. But what we're worried about now is that the area where is suitable for alpine plants is moving upwards. And so some of the alpine flora are becoming extinct. So the things that I studied when I was a boy may not be there for much longer. In fact, my first paper I ever wrote was a paper on the botany of Ben Lawers when in the school magazine of the school I was at. This is an interesting report in the paper the other day. Britain's first olive grove is a sign of hotter times. 15 miles from where I live, in Devon, is this man who's setting up an olive grove with the help of olive growers from Italy, because he reckons that he will be able to easily harvest olives in Devon, something that would be unheard of years ago because our climate was so much colder in winter and the olive trees would have died. But they're doing very well. One of our lovely little rodents is called the dormouse, and it is being affected. This was something else I cut out of the paper a couple of weeks ago, and it all adds up to the same thing. There's something wrong. Then we see it in what is happening in the melting of ice sheets and glaciers. Many of the world's glaciers are retreating at an alarming rate. The ice sheet in the Arctic is getting thinner and thinner. What does that mean? It actually means that sea levels are rising quite fast, both from the melting of ice and from the thermal expansion because the oceans are hotter. And then what's the knock-on effect of that? Coral reefs are being affected and dying out too. So there is something very wrong. This is just the cover of Bioscience, a journal of the Association of Biologists of the United States. And the headline down here says, "Shrubs Advance in the Arctic." I used this as my last image in the talk I gave yesterday at the conference, because the Patriarch's next symposium is in the Arctic. And I said, next year you've got to address this very seriously, because I'm worried about the Amazon rainforest. It's all very low, and if we don't stop the sea level rising, we can't defend the rainforest because it will be flooded out. So all these different things are linked together. The environment is very much linked wherever you are. This graph is probably familiar to most people. It shows how carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is rising. And that is one of the several so-called greenhouse gases that cause climate warming. And how does this get into the atmosphere? Well, it comes from all the fossil fuels we burn, from the petroleum and coal, and 22% of it comes from deforestation. So the deforestation is also very much part of the cause of this. And if you look at this one, which shows the CO2 from the year 1000 up to the present, you see that suddenly it begins to rise. Down here in about 1800 was the Industrial Revolution, when we started using a lot of coal, and then shortly after petroleum. And so it gradually, instead of just varying slightly in natural things, it suddenly began to shoot up exponentially, so that now it is up to 360 parts per million. So it is a cause for great alarm. So we really need to do something about this. And this is the graph of population growth. Exactly parallels the other one. Here is 4000 BC, and the population increasing just a little bit. Then, in about 1800, it begins to be exponential, and we are up here nearly to 6 billion people. More, more mouths to feed, and more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is one of the aspects that many religions have difficulty addressing, but we need to, whatever our religion is, think about the increasing population and what we're going to do about that. The Earth Summit that took place in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 drew up the Climate Change Convention and the Convention on Biological Diversity. So that was the first time that world politicians really began to get interested. And the man who organised it was called Maurice Strong. And I asked him to come and give the annual Kew environmental lecture on the topic of Rio 1 year after. And this is how he concluded his lecture. This was not in a religious gathering. It was in the Jodrell Laboratory at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. And he says, in the final analysis, our economic and social behaviour is rooted in our deepest moral and spiritual motivations. We cannot expect to make the fundamental changes needed in our economic life unless they're based on the highest and best of our moral, spiritual and ethical traditions, a reverence for life, a respect for each other, and a commitment to responsible stewardship of the earth. The transition to a sustainable society must be undergirded by a moral, ethical and spiritual revolution which places these values at the centre of our individual and societal lives. Now that surely is an appeal to religions. I know that a reverence for life, a respect for each other, and a commitment to responsible stewardship of the earth are certainly part of the Christian faith, and I know they are of Islam and Hindu, so I think this is an appeal for us and a very good way in which religion, science and the environment come together. But we can't isolate the environment from poverty in the world. This is a sad picture. It shows that the top 20% in the world control 82.7% of the wealth, and the lowest percentile, 20 percentile, only 1.4%. And then above that, the next 20%, only 1.9% of the wealth. This is a sad comment. How could I expect a poor man who's got some timber on his lot in Brazil not to sell it to feed his children if that is necessary? Yet, if we don't address these sort of issues, we won't solve the environmental crisis. And it is significant that the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that I showed some conclusions from had a lot to say about poverty as well. And I think that we need to see what the world is telling us. Our scriptures tell us various instructions. Ask the animals and they will teach you, or the birds of the air and they will tell you, or speak to the earth and it will teach you, or let the fish of the sea inform. Some very wise words from the scriptures, from the book of Job. And you've seen what biology is telling us, what the flowers are telling us, what the dormice are telling us, all these different things that I've been talking about. And he tells us to pay attention to them. And another, from the book of Proverbs, talks about the ant. Consider its ways, be wise. We're not listening to what the world is telling us, what biology is telling us. We're not obeying these sort of commands. And it also says in the prophet Isaiah, some of the purposes of putting these trees, the cedar, the acacia, the myrtle and the olive, I will set in the desert the cypress, the plane and the pine together, so that all may see and all may consider and understand that the Lord has done this. We need to make these links, I think, if we're really going to address the environment properly. But it is so beautiful. The Amazon River in fact, this is just where I was 2 days ago on the Rio Negro, a big tributary of the Amazon. God's creation. Now, I want to go into a few things that are more positive and not just send you away being negative about it all. One of the plants I've done a lot of work on is the Brazil nut. And Brazil nuts grow in these shells at the top of a tree. That's why they're the strange shape that they are. And to get these Brazil nuts, you need to have a bee that pollinates it, and a little rodent called the agouti that can open them and plant them. Well, these people here from the Amazon make their living opening Brazil nuts, or part of it. You see they've all got a t-shirt on, that says Tataquara. They're all members of a cooperative. And this cooperative is doing several things. It's got a tourist lodge called Tataquara Lodge, and it's got a whole lot of people out in the forests from various tribes gathering the Brazil nuts. But what do they do with them? They take the Brazil nuts, here they are, out to dry, and this man is opening them, and here this woman is distilling the oil, and here is the oil. So they're not just selling Brazil nuts, they are extracting the oil, so they're adding value to their product. And as a result, they're getting a fair deal. People traditionally who've collected Brazil nuts in the Amazon forest have been paid a pittance, and then someone transports them and doubles the price, and someone else takes them to the factory and doubles the price, and so the producer gets nothing. But here, because these people work for the co-op, a cooperative organization, they're all getting the same share of the profit, and it is a fair price because it is bought by a perfume company, the Body Shop, which has very specific trade guidelines. I'm all for fair trade, coffee, chocolate, or anything else. And I'm glad that in the supermarkets in the UK, the amount that's sold is going up. It is one way that we can show and help the people to live sustainably in the rainforest without cutting it down. Here's another interesting one, the Yawanawa in the Amazon, one of the tribes there, use a red dye a great deal on their body as a body paint. But they've made a deal with the Aveda Corporation to grow this and to sell it directly to Aveda, because it's used in lipstick and in various other cosmetics. And so again, the Yawanawa now is a culture that is growing and becoming much more prosperous, but restoring their original culture. The Yawanawa were down to about 300 people. They're now 650. And one of their chiefs spoke to us at this symposium, and one of their shamans also spoke. Very moving speeches about how their culture has revived. So a relation with a commercial company here has not acculturated them. In fact, it's done the opposite. Many of the people who had spread away because of the poverty and the persecution of them have come back. Some have had to learn Yawanawa language because they were moved out as children. And this is all because a sustainable relationship has been set up. I'm currently working with the Guarani people in Argentina, and I have a project to incorporate them into the management of a forest reserve. Here is one of my PhD students here, Hector Keller, who's doing his thesis on the way these Indians use plants. But what we've done to start with to make more income for them is make a trail through the forest where every tree is labelled with its Latin name and its Guarani name. In fact, this label here is the label of this orchid that's perched on the tree rather than the tree. But you can pay $5 and go with a Guarani guide around the 1.5 kilometer trail and have a fascinating lecture on how they live and manage the rainforest. And in the process, we're also learning a lot about how we can use that forest sustainably without cutting it down. So this is very useful. I show one more verse of scripture which says, for 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield, but the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the wild animals may eat. You shall do the same with your vineyard and with your olive grove. Now this is interesting. It's telling the principle of giving the land a rest. And the reason is so that the poor may eat, and what they leave the wild animals may eat. In other words, it's thinking about the whole of nature. Now these people live in the high Andes in Bolivia. They are called the Aymara Indians. They have a wonderful system of agriculture where they grow crops. This one is called quinoa. And they try and meet together in the winter, and the chief will tell them, this year to one family you plant quinoa, to another one you plant potato, another you plant amaranth, all the different crops that they have. But then they will say to some families, you leave your land to lie fallow, to rest this year. Well, do those people suffer because they don't have food? No, because everyone else brings in food, the best of their food, to them. And so they are doing very well. In the year they have to leave their fields uncultivated. Well, about 20 years ago, when Bolivia was going through a very deep financial crisis, the agricultural department said, look at all that wasted land amongst the Aymara. And so what did they do? They sent in agricultural extension agents telling them to cultivate it all because this will improve the balance of payments in Bolivia. Did the production go up? No, it went down. Fortunately, a group of missionaries and Christians living near the Aymara from several different Christian denominations, the Methodists, the Catholics, and the Mennonites, got together, and they were a strong enough force to get the government to reverse its decision and let the Aymara system go on. This is a picture of the institution I work for now. It's called the Eden Project in the southwest of England, in Cornwall. And it's a wonderful demonstration of how you can restore something that's been spoiled. It is in what was a clay mine, an abandoned clay mine. And this is a rainforest dome that covers 2 hectares. And there we are trying to show people as many rainforest plants as we can. And then outside there are all sorts of plants planted to show. And the purpose of the project is to show the critical importance of plants to people and to promote the sustainable use of plant resources. This is built as a tourist attraction not as a botanic garden, because we realize that one of the important things is that particularly city children need to learn that where various things come from and about where we get coffee, cocoa, bananas, rubber, all the things that enter into their life. So we're growing and interpreting about them, but we're also doing a lot to encourage conservation and sustainable use of plants. My project in Argentina is one of our overseas ones. We have a project in the Seychelles on the rare and endangered plants there, and we're growing them and sending back, and we're also raising money for the conservation of Seychelles plants by selling a hybrid that we made from one. And our latest building, which is our education centre, is a carbon neutral building. On the roof there are a whole lot of solar collectors to generate electricity. It has very good insulation, and so we want to demonstrate that you can build buildings that don't contribute to climate change. But more importantly, this is the centre of education. We have lots of school children and adults too coming to courses in the education building and learning that all life depends on plants, and that if we don't use them sustainably, there won't be a future for us. There are various other projects like this. I'm very proud of my daughter who's just bought a flat in this development, which is called the Bennington Zero Energy Development. It's just south of London, and it was built 5 years ago, and it was an experimental building to show how you can build without using much energy. It was the first one of several that they're doing now, and so there were some problems in it, but it's working using far less energy than the average building. The small flat that my daughter has bought uses about £200 worth of electricity in a year, and because it doesn't need very much for anything, it's so well insulated, and the air circulation is so good. Also, it has community cars, encourages people not to own a car, but if you must go out to the shops or something, you rent one of the community cars, and so that you don't have more than are necessary. Alternative forms of energy are part of this. Wind is something that we need to develop more in many parts of the world. I heard one of the lectures at the conference in Brazil on Brazil's plan to put a lot of wind turbines along the coast of Brazil. And to finish with, 2 years ago in Brazil, I was a small village, 1,500 miles up the Amazon. And I was there on the 7th of September, which is Brazil's Independence Day. And the children were all parading. And the theme of it was all about the environment. This one says, nature is a public patrimony. This one says, no to biopiracy. And there were many, many different messages from those children. When my children were small and growing up in Brazil, the Independence Day parades were very military. And I can remember, I've got photos of my daughters marching in the Independence Day parade with a soldier beside them. But now it is good to see that these children are presenting to the future generations what they think about the environment. One of the most important things that we need to do is to think about educating children on the environment, because they are the future. The North American Indians, and another of my students studied in Maine and Quebec, say before they cut down a piece of forest or a tree, they discuss what is the effect of doing this on the 7th unborn generation. That is, thinking about their great-great-great-great-grandchildren. How often do we do that? One of the problems why the world is not addressing the environment crisis is that the politicians think in the term of a 4 or 5 year term of office, and so much is short-term thinking. But the environment is long-term, and that is a very good reason why religion needs to get in on the act and take a strong stand. Not just because it requires a lot of change, but it needs this long-term thinking. So I hope that each of you, as you go back to your countries, will be deeply involved in the environment, but that you'll give it a strong ethical base from out of your different faiths. I know the teachings are there in many of these faiths, and so I think we all need to. I spend a lot of time at working with various organizations that are Christian and working on conservation. For example, this one, Arrocha, that means the rock in Portuguese. And you see below it says what it's about, Christians in conservation. There are Arrochas working in 16 different countries around the world where scientists are working together in community for conservation. But it has more than that. It has the Christian teachings. It began here in Portugal, in a wetland in the Algarve that is increasingly more important because so much of the Algarve in southern Portugal is built up now, and migratory birds need somewhere to land on their way. And so it's a very important area, and it wouldn't be here. This photo I couldn't have taken if it hadn't been that there's this group of Christians that are there studying those birds and really pleading for the conservation of the area. Arrocha works in Canada, it works in India. I went to the launch of Arrocha India. Here are some of the people involved, and the gentleman down here is the director of Arrocha UK that works in an urban environment in Southall, in London. So we are all trying to do something about it. In India again, in the Kalrayan Hills, where they are gradually establishing an Arrocha project. There are a lot of Christian organizations that are interested in the environment. Excuse me, just putting up the Christian ones. Those are the ones I'm familiar with. I am sure there are equivalents in other faiths too, but each of these are important. And this is an interesting one, climate stewards, because it allows you to compensate for journeys that you make. If I fly to Brazil, I can get some trees planted in Arrocha, Lebanon, or Arrocha, Kenya, in order to compensate for the carbon that was used on my flight. And so that's one of the interesting ones. The one that's called eco-congregation is encouraging churches to become more environmentally conscious. So there are many opportunities in faiths to be doing something about the environment. So I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you tonight.
Thank you very much, Sir Ghillean. I wonder if we might just prevail on you to answer any questions just for a few minutes, if there are any. Yes, I see hands going up straight away. If you're near enough, I'll pass you the microphone.
Thank you for your talk. You mentioned a multi-volume work that listed various technologies that could be used to make them change, but it involves significant policy changes and economic changes and so on. I was wondering, could you tell us maybe about one or two of those, what needs to be done?
Yes, the document I mentioned is assessment. And if you put that into Google, I'm sure you come to the website. The address exactly, I don't remember at the moment. But the question is, what does it tell us to do? Well, the most striking thing that everyone is saying is how serious the crisis is, and that it would take a great deal of effort by everyone. So it's really, the first thing is an appeal to take the environmental crisis seriously. Then it has various suggestions. Obvious ones are to cut back on deforestation. So much of the deforestation of the tropics is for non-sustainable things. My visit to the soybean field 5 days ago, I was asking questions about it, and I found that the average soybean field gives a crop for 3 years. The Amazon soil is so poor that it won't go on. And so then they need to cut down more and more and more. So halting deforestation. But on the other side, land that has been deforested needs to be restored. So restoration of destroyed habitats is another very important thing. But it's interesting that in the biological one, it also says we need to be addressing climate change because that is affecting how we are affecting the whole of biology. So all the obvious things about that, or using sustainable energy sources, not causing the climate to change so much, both in our personal behavior and in the behavior of nations. It's a very strong statement to the politicians and for action, citizen action, on the environment, to be writing to our politicians, whether it's local or national or international. So it's encouraging political activity. I think we'll only really make the change if that is done, and it's probably one of the most important things, because we've got a lot of the scientific data now, and we've got a lot of interest from a lot of people. But even though we've got some various conventions and things, 1992, the Convention on Biodiversity and Climate Change, but it really hasn't halted what's happening in the world yet. That was something we debated a great deal in Brazil this last time. So those are just a few things, but it's a very large package of things in the Millennium ecosystem, mainly addressed to behavior.
As shocking as the deforestation that's going on in the Amazon forest is concerned, what I think the important issue is also to be able to find alternate types of feed for the animals that depend on the soya, which is cultivated. So what lines of inquiry have been made in that regard? Has there been any progress in providing alternative? Because that seems to be a cheaper alternative which is providing a way forward for many other farmers around the world. But if you were to complain about that, is there an alternative?
That is a good question, because you can't just say don't cut the forests. You have to think of the livelihood of all the peoples that live there. That's why I showed that cooperative and also the relationship between Aveda and the Yawanara Indians. Because for the last 20 years, most of my research in the Amazon has been not on the biological exploration that I began with, but on alternatives to use the forest without cutting it down. So you're absolutely right, but that's the sort of thing we need to do. I gave you just 2 examples, but there are many others, and there are a lot of people working on trying to do that. Brazil nuts are all harvested from the wild, from trees that grow in the forest. They fall off the tree, and you pick them up off the forest floor. So you are not damaging the forest at all. Brazil has now declared a whole lot of reserves that are called extractive 1788 with just 2, but now there are about 50, and those are reserves for local people where they are allowed to take nuts, resins, rubber, all these things out of the forest, but they're not allowed to cut anything other than just a very small area for their vegetables, a small home garden. And so this concept of extractivist reserves is another thing that is helping to conserve the Amazon. And so we need lots of different projects like that, because there is not one answer to that. It will be multi-uses, and in one area, one thing may be the solution, in another area, another. One thing I do quite a lot of is tourism. I take groups to the Amazon, but I don't take it on a foreign cruise ship. I take it on a small boat that takes up to 20 people. It was built in a small town called Novo Eirão, up the Rio Negro, and it is a Brazilian crew, and we eat Brazilian food, and so all the money that's spent on that goes to people of the Amazon. And so that is another way of making the forest pay for itself. The trail I showed you is another part of ecotourism. Not everything that says it's ecotourism is. So it is important to create options that truly are helping the people and helping to pay for the forest. I was telling a reserve I went into Brazil on this last trip a few days ago. We went into one of their large national forests and visited people who are using the forest without cutting it down. But I said, why didn't I have to pay to go into this reserve? And is that because I'm with the patriarch and all the VIPs? And they said, no, nobody was to pay to go in. And so I said, well, they should. We, foreigners, can afford to pay. I should have paid $20 to go into this reserve, as we did today. And so encouraging that sort of thing, because yes, you can't say don't cut the forest unless you've got the alternatives. We'll take one more.
So Ghillean says there's one more before we all fall asleep. You're the winner.
Thank you. Sister Dorothy Stang paid the ultimate price for defense of the environment in the Amazon. Has anything changed since her murder?
I'm right up to date on that question. Sister Dorothy Stang was a wonderful nun who really worked to defend the local people that were being evicted from their land by the large farmers. And she really did all she could to help them. The result was that the landowner in the area that she was particularly active sent in people to kill her, and she was killed 18 months ago. What a terrible thing to assassinate a 70-year-old nun who's devoted her life to the Amazon forest. Well, they did eventually arrest 2 people after vast protests about why haven't they been. But last week, one of them was paroled, and so he's been in jail for less than 6 months for killing Dorothy Stang. So on that side, the justice side is really not working very well. And the other thing I would say, this conference I was at had, as I said, a lot of activists in it who are fighting to stop the soy spreading, fighting to stop the people being evicted from their land. And I learned about 3 other martyrs that were killed 6 months ago: Bartolomeo, Jose, and João. Now you haven't heard of those. They're humble Brazilian protesters. When it was someone like North American nun, who was quite well known, it did hit the news. And so I think that it made so many people indignant that it made a lot more people and I think that she did not die in vain, even though justice is not being done to the people who assassinated her. There was so much indignation that it's got a lot more people fighting for the cause, but there's still martyrs happening all the time. And several of the people who were there told me they had life threats. There was a padre, Catholic priest from Santarém, who got up and gave a little testimony, and he said he's had 3 letters threatening his life, because he is working, he's one of the real spokesmen, he's a very eloquent priest, and he is speaking out against the soil spreading up where all these small farmers that he works with, his parishioners, live. And so they're threatening his life. And he goes around now with 2 guards everywhere. Very sad when a priest has to be accompanied by guards because of that. So that is a very, very real problem at the moment. So thank you for asking the question.